So you think the American West was built by sheriffs, cowboys, and gold miners? Wrong. It was built by prostitutes. They weren't just present in frontier towns, they funded them. Their income paid for schools, churches, roads, and hospitals. They created early banking and credit systems. They owned real estate, controlled politicians, and in some cases ran entire towns from behind the scenes. The Wild West wasn't tamed by lawmen. It was financed by the women history tried to erase. Let's begin. When gold was discovered in California in 1848, tens of thousands of men flooded west. They were miners, laborers, drifters, overwhelmingly male. In some mining camps, men outnumbered women 100 to 1. These men had money from mining, gambling, and labor, and they had needs: food, alcohol, entertainment, and sex. Prostitutes provided the last one, and they made a fortune doing it. In gold rush towns like San Francisco, a prostitute could charge $400 per night, equivalent to over $10,000 today. That's more than most miners made in a month. The demand was so high that women traveled from across the country, from Europe, from South America, specifically to work in Western brothels. And the money didn't just disappear, it circulated. Madams, women who owned and operated brothels, invested in real estate, opening saloons, hotels, and theaters. They paid taxes, hired employees, and became some of the wealthiest business people in frontier towns. In Virginia City, Nevada, a booming silver mining town, brothels generated so much revenue that they funded the construction of the town's first school and contributed to building the Opera House. When civic leaders needed money for infrastructure, they didn't go to the bank, they went to the madams. The city of Deadwood, South Dakota, is another example. Prostitution was technically illegal, but law enforcement turned a blind eye because the tax revenue from fines, basically legalized bribes, was essential. The city collected fines from brothels monthly, and that money paid for streetlights, water systems, and law enforcement salaries. So yes, sheriffs were partially funded by the prostitutes they were supposed to be arresting. The hypocrisy was blatant, but the economics worked. Frontier towns needed money, and vice provided it. Some madams didn't just participate in the economy, they dominated it. Take Mattie Silks, one of the most famous madams in Denver, Colorado. Born in 1846, Mattie entered sex work as a teenager and quickly realized that working for someone else was a losing game. By her 20s, she owned her own brothel. By her 30s, she owned multiple properties, invested in real estate, and was one of the wealthiest women in Denver. She rubbed elbows with mayors, judges, and businessmen. She attended the theater, donated to charities, and lived openly as a successful entrepreneur. Yes, everyone knew how she made her money, and no one cared because she had power. Mattie was also a shrewd businesswoman. She offered credit to her clients, essentially running an informal lending system. Miners and laborers who were broke between paydays could run up tabs at her brothel, which they'd settle when they got paid. This created customer loyalty and gave Mattie leverage over her clients. If someone owed her money, she could call in the debt or use it as blackmail if needed. She understood that in a cash-poor frontier economy, controlling credit meant controlling people. Then there's Big Nose Kate, lover of the infamous Doc Holliday and a madam in her own right. Kate worked in brothels across Arizona and New Mexico, eventually saving enough money to open her own establishment. She was known for being tough, financially savvy, and utterly fearless. When Doc Holliday was arrested in Arizona, Kate allegedly started a fire as a distraction, allowing him to escape. She wasn't just a passive figure in Wild West lore. She was an active participant, using her resources and connections to influence events. Perhaps the most powerful was Jessie Hayman, known as the Duchess, who operated in Silver City, New Mexico. In the 1890s, Jessie didn't just run a brothel. She controlled local politics. She bankrolled political campaigns, paid off judges, and had several law enforcement officers on her payroll. When a reform movement tried to shut down her business, she blackmailed key city officials with information about their own visits to her establishment. The reform effort collapsed. Jessie remained in business for decades, dying wealthy and respected by those who mattered. Her funeral was attended by prominent businessmen and politicians, publicly mourning a woman whose money and influence they'd relied on for years. These women understood power. They weren't victims passively exploited by a patriarchal system. They were entrepreneurs navigating a brutal economy. Using the only assets society allowed them, their bodies, and their business acumen to build wealth and influence. And many of them succeeded spectacularly. Prostitutes and madams didn't just make money, they created financial infrastructure. In the absence of formal banks, which were rare in frontier towns, brothels often functioned as informal lending institutions. Madams extended credit, held valuables for safekeeping, and even mediated debts between clients. Minors would leave gold dust or cash with trusted madams rather than risk robbery. This gave madams financial power and insider knowledge of who had money, who was broke, and who was desperate, information they could exploit. Some madams used this leverage to control local politics. Mollie Johnson, a madam in Deadwood, allegedly had detailed records of every prominent man who visited her brothel. When a local politician tried to push anti-vice legislation, Mollie threatened to release her records publicly. The legislation died quietly. She understood that in a society obsessed with respectability, the threat of exposure was more powerful than any weapon. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many of these women eventually became respectable. After accumulating wealth, some madams retired, married into respectable families, or reinvented themselves as businesswomen. Laura Evans, a madam in Salida, Colorado, operated for over 30 years before retiring in the 1950s. She donated to local charities, attended church, and was quietly accepted into polite society despite everyone knowing her past. Why? Because she had money, and in the West, money bought respectability. But not all prostitutes had happy endings. Many died young from disease, violence, or addiction. Others were exploited by pimps, brothel owners, or corrupt lawmen. The women who succeeded were exceptions, not the rule. Still, their success challenges the simple narrative of prostitutes as victims. They were economic agents operating in a system that offered women almost no legitimate paths to wealth or power, and some of them won. So there you have it. Prostitutes weren't just present in the American West, they were essential to its development. They financed towns, created credit systems, controlled politicians, and built empires from brothels. The romantic image of the cowboy sheriff taming the Wild West, propaganda, the real story is messier, more economic, and far more interesting. The West was built by people chasing money, miners, merchants, outlaws, and yes, prostitutes. And the women in that last category were often the smartest, toughest, and wealthiest of all. History erased them because acknowledging their role would complicate the myth, but the records exist. City tax ledgers, property deeds, court documents, obituaries. These women lived, worked, built, and profited. And without them, many frontier towns wouldn't have survived. The next time someone romanticizes the Wild West, remember, it wasn't sheriffs who built it. It was the women no one wanted to talk about.